Hello, everybody! I hope you guys are doing great today. I'm very excited to be with you on All Saints Day. It's been a while since I did a stream live. We don't have too many people here today, but it's good to see some old friends, Requiem, Scrumpy, some new people as well. So hopefully as time goes on, more people join the stream. If not, that's okay. They can watch, hopefully, the replay. Just wanted to touch on some, just about what is our purpose in life. That is something I wanted to talk about today. Connect that to the Feast of Christ the King, which was yesterday. Obviously, today, like I mentioned, is All Saints Day, which is very exciting. We celebrate the lives of the saints, those who have gone before us. The church triumphant now in heaven, who pray for us, who intercede for us before God the Father. And then tomorrow, we celebrate All Souls Day. We remember the holy souls in purgatory, the church suffering, those who are now waiting to receive into the beatific vision. We pray for them. And it's a very special day tomorrow because you can have an infinite number of plenary indulgences for the dead, the poor souls in purgatory. So if you go to a cemetery, you can go to a Catholic cemetery, and every tombstone you can pray, I believe it's the Apostles' Creed and an Our Father for the intentions of the Pope. As long as you've taken Holy Communion and you've gone to confession at least within the last 8 days, you can receive a plenary indulgence for the soul of the dead so that he can be sprung from purgatory into heaven. So that's a great benefit that the Church has given to us on All Souls Day. It only comes once a year, though I believe the Pope has extended very mercifully that privilege to the entire month of November because of COVID. Yeah, it's good to see Requiem. It's good to see Blue Chicken. How are you guys doing today? I'm going to Mass in probably a few hours, but I hope I didn't catch too many people in a bad time. I was hoping to do it in time before Nick started streaming, before other people started streaming. Let me know if it's too loud in the background either. I have the window open. I try to keep some fresh air blowing in here. It's almost Christmas time now. We're getting there. I always have to get through October 31st, and then that's like the milestone in which now we can start listening to Christmas music and begin an approach of Advent. But life's been good for me. I'm a teacher, so hopefully you guys who are still students, you guys are doing all right. But it's an interesting occupation. Learning how to handle classroom management, learning how to act like a sophisticated adult who has to be mature. Can't meme with the students. You have to be mature. You have to be strict. You have to be upfront with them. You can't pretend to be their friend, otherwise they'll definitely take advantage of you. So that's been an interesting challenge for me to try to figure out, to try to work out. But it's very fulfilling. It's something that I really do enjoy, especially when I'm able to talk about my faith, talk about things that I feel passionate about. And I was able to invite one of my students to Mass yesterday, the Feast of Christ the King. He's from China, so China number one. My Chinese students at my school, there's a small population of students that are from China. They're from China. They're not like Chinese Americans. They're from China who are studying in the United States. And they're obviously my favorite students, not only because they're really good at math and very respectful, extremely respectful the entire time. And you don't hear them complain about things. You don't hear them talk while I'm trying to talk. Very respectful. They're always listening, taking good notes. Perfect students, and then they're good at math. They get high scores, so they make me feel like I'm a good teacher, regardless of whether I am or not. So anyway, these Chinese students, and also they're really based too. So sometimes they'll invite me to eat lunch with them. So I'll eat lunch with them, and then they'll talk to me about things, and I ask them what do you think about the stuff going on in Taiwan, or what do you think about the fact they've invented this hypersonic missile? And they're like, yeah, mainland number one, and I cheer them on. I wish them the best of luck in their defeat of the American Empire. Anyway, what was I saying? Okay, so I have a Chinese student. One of these Chinese students, he's unlike a lot of them who are atheists. He actually is a Christian. He converted to Christianity, I think, a few years ago, and he wasn't sure about the differences between Protestants and Catholics. All he knows is that he likes the idea of Christianity. He believes in like the main tenets and the Nicene Creed and things like that. And so I invited him to Mass with me. And afterwards, I asked him what he thought, and he said this thing that was, I thought, really insightful. Because before this, prior to this, he had only gone to like Protestant churches. What he said is that, and he quoted this for a start. He started by quoting Proverbs 9:10, which says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And he says that oftentimes, particularly in Protestant churches, there isn't really this emphasis on the fear of the Lord. There's this emphasis on God's love, His mercy, but not so much the justice, not so much sin, not so much the punishment for sin, judgment, not so much the fear and reverence that is owed to God. And obviously God is loving, God is merciful, gracious, etc. But He is also just. There is a judgment, there is a punishment for sin, and there is also a certain reverence owed to God, a certain fear of the Lord that is the beginning of wisdom, that the student rightfully pointed out. And he said that at the Catholic service, particularly this was a Latin Mass, a high Mass I took him to, he said that through the ceremonies, through the rites, he could really see the fear of the Lord made manifest through this ceremony, just through our kneeling, through genuflections, through the signs of the cross. Everything showed a reverence and a respect for God. The fact that the priest holds his two fingers together after the consecration until the ablutions is something that just shows the reverence and the amount of care we take in dealing with the precious body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ contained in the sacrament. So I thought that was a really interesting insight. He also said that he liked the fact that there was a lot more, it was very dynamic. The service is a lot more dynamic in terms of its structure, unlike a Protestant service where he says kind of like they just sing and then they have a sermon for like an hour and a half and then they sing some more songs. And then he said he went to a Pentecostal church where they like had spoken tongues for a bit after that. He said that he liked the more dynamic atmosphere aimed towards the Eucharist. He didn't use that term because he didn't understand, the technical aspect. But he said like, aimed towards the communion part. So I hope, pray for him, pray for his soul, pray for my friends as well. I've been getting some friends to go with me to Mass, so definitely please pray for them. Let me know if you guys have any prayer requests that I can pray for you. If you could pray for me as well, just that school goes well. I don't get in trouble for posting videos on YouTube about Christianity and sometimes controversial subjects. Yeah, so true, Sneed Chucky. Yeah, the Gen Z Christians, Zoomers were erasing the cringe that was left by millennials, but particularly I think the Boomer generation gave us the Novus Ordo. They gave us, I think, a lot of these pop worship songs. They're the ones who kind of started with the revolt against the Gregorian chants, revolt against the traditional hymnals and stuff like that. So I'm glad that there's a revival of tradition amongst certain members of the Gen Z community. It really is very bifurcated, and I notice this in my classes, that people because I teach Gen Z, that people who are conservative, they're like based. They understand, and maybe not everything. They're not like maybe they don't get all the race stuff, but they're definitely based on like immigration and things like that. They're definitely not, I don't think, Zionist. But then the people who are like the cringe, they're like very cringe too. It's like they're like they do astrology and they want nothing to do with Christ, and they are very, very much, I think, tormented on the inside. There seems to me something that's just they're missing something in their life. Augustine said that our hearts are restless until they rest in you, O Lord. And see the restlessness in some of my students. So I pray for them often. Yeah, Hillsong. Yeah, the Hillsong. And who was Amy Grant? No, that was Christian artist. I'm sure some of you guys are aware of. Yeah. Blue Chicken says, imagine you getting called into the admin office like, so explain the anime villas to us, sir. Well, I haven't really been advertising those since I became a teacher. Yeah, good. That's a keen observation there. Yeah, they still exist in my closet, but yeah, that would be an interesting conversation to have. But I mostly talk about like Catholic stuff here. They're just props to bring, as I always say, they're props to bring people in, bring some attention to myself. They're very effective in the beginnings, especially when I started my channel. Let's see, Requiem says very wholesome. I've been going to TLM. That's awesome. Glad to hear that, man, since the summer mode proprio, and I haven't looked back. Yes, the TLM. If you haven't seen the documentary Mass of the Ages, there's part 1 is out. I can't wait for part 2 and part 3, but part 1 is out. It's really good. I showed part of it to my students, the part where they just had like the Kyrie, the polyphony chant going. They had the Kyrie. It was just so beautiful. It's just very aesthetic. Anyway, so let's talk today about the Feast of Christ the King. Let's start there. That was the feast yesterday. Very beautiful high mass. They had a procession afterwards, and then the presentation of the Blessed Sacrament and the monstrance. Very beautiful service. One of my favorite services probably in the year, because they sing the hymn, well, because it's the Feast of Christ the King. You know, whenever we go to rallies, we always chant Christ is King. So yeah, it's true, Christ is King. And also because like there's that really beautiful hymn we always sing, to Jesus Christ our sovereign King, who is the world's salvation. All praise and honor and thanksgiving is owed to thee. Something like that. If I sung it, I could probably get it correct, but I don't want to sing for you guys. I don't have a really great voice. I especially like the second verse when it says that his reign extends to all nations. And this just reminds us that there is no such thing as separation of church and state. It reminds us that either Christ is king, that he is the rightful king of the world, and that all temporal governments derive their authority and their legitimacy and their power from Christ, and will be held accountable to Christ, and whether or not they promoted virtue, the common good, and if for Christian countries, whether or not they promoted Christianity, in very specifically. For other nations, they would be held accountable whether or not they promoted at least the natural law. Or the church is simply, at best, a social institution. At worst, the religion is just the opioid of the masses. The opiate of the masses, as Marx said, and therefore the church should be regulated by the state like it is in China. It should be very much controlled. It should not be something that is independent. This idea of like there's two separate spheres, the church or the state, this is an illusion. Either the church and Christ is king and everyone is subject to him, or the church is going to be subjugated by the state, by the secular world. And we already know which one is true. We already know that Christ is the rightful king of the world. And how did he become the rightful king of the world? Well, after Adam and Eve sinned, as you can see in the world around us, we have, we have sin, and particularly we start with original sin. And at that time, Satan had dominion over all the world. When original sin came into humanity, Satan takes control, you could say, and this is why when Jesus is tempted by Satan, Satan shows him on a high mountaintop all the kingdoms of the world and says, "Look at all these things I own. They could all be yours if you bow down to me." And he of course says, "No, you can only worship God." And he says, "Begone, Satan." And so in today, I think we see a lot of that. That we see that the Christ is not yet king of every single person, unfortunately. And probably at this time, less so now than it was even like 20 years ago or 50 years ago. It seems that Christ is becoming less and less king of the United States, king of the Western world. Certainly, that is true. We've seen great degeneration, and more power and control has been given over to Satan. However, we know that Christ is king, and the rightful king, and that he will, in fact, restore his kingdom on earth on the final judgment, because, one, he came down in his incarnation. That's where it starts. In his incarnation, God, the second person of the Trinity, conjoins his divine nature with the human nature in the hypostatic union. Now, God is obviously already the rightful owner of everything, and so therefore Jesus, the incarnate Logos, is also the rightful ruler of everything. But even beyond that, he also, in his mission, he lived a perfect life. And so in his perfection, in Christ's perfection, he defeated sin. That is what gave Satan power and control, was sin entering into the world through Adam and Eve. Christ, and through his obedience to the Father, even unto death, even death on the cross, was the antidote to sin. It conquered sin. And then finally, in his resurrection, he conquered the effects of sin, one of the chief punishments, or you could say effects of sin, which is death, bodily death. And so Christ, in his resurrection, he was able to conquer all of that, and therefore now he is the rightful king over all of the world. He conquered sin, he conquered death, and his mission, and his resurrection. And now he invites us to join him in that kingdom that he is preparing. And so that is what we celebrate on the Feast of Christ the King, is we want to prepare, we want to recognize that everything is owed to Christ, and then we want to make Christ the King of our lives, and then try to do what we can to prepare the way for Christ in this world at this very present moment, so that when Christ does come back, we can share in his kingdom. That is the great invitation that Christ gives us, is to share in the kingdom for all eternity. Which is also happens to be the ultimate end for which we were created. And that's what I want to talk about. Let me just get a drink of water there. Blue Chicken says there was one day where I was like, oh, can you choose God with an anime thumbnail? Oh, and it's this guy. Yeah, that was one of my videos. That's very true. Let me plug my entropy link, so in case you guys have questions, I can answer those. I definitely want to get to you guys' questions after the main portion. Let me get my entropy link out. It's been a while since I've done a stream, so usually I have it, usually I just have it pulled up, but today I realized I need to go digging for it a bit. One second. If you have questions, that's definitely the best place to put them. Here we go. It's entropystream.live/anime-rightist. All one word. Alright. So yeah, talking about the ultimate end for which humans were created. What happened to the AF flag? Great question. It's right over there. You can't see it, it's off screen, but it's right over there. Like I mentioned, I replaced it with the Knights Templar flag just because I think that matches more the stuff I'm talking about. I don't talk about politics as much as I used to, so I think the Knights Templar flag is kind of... I'll probably replace it eventually with something else too. I just like to change it up, you know? Alright, so talking about our end as humans. Beginning with the fact that we all have some starting point. I'm drawing here, let me show you what I'm drawing. Can you see this okay? So we all have some starting point, and then we all have some end sub-I. And the sub-I is because it's some intermediary end. And this end could be like studying for a test, okay? We have studying for a test. As a teacher, I know all about that. So we have studying for a test. This is some intermediary end. And we employ some means to achieve that intermediary end. We employ some means to achieve this intermediary end. But nobody lives life in order to just study for a test. This test, this end, this is why it's an intermediary end, is aimed at some other further end. Which could be like getting a good grade. Alright, so we have another end here. I'm also going to say it's an intermediary end, because no one is just trying to get a good grade for the sake of getting a good grade. They want to get into like a good college, or something like that. And I think most of you guys are students, so many of you guys understand this kind of process, and then again, you have to employ some means to do that. Understand this process of life in which we're going through, and so you have then these multiple steps until eventually you have to get to some end which is self-referential, that just points to itself. It is an end in itself. And eventually, through this series of means, has to be some end that you see as just intrinsically good for its own sake. And even if you think that your life is aimless, that you don't have an end whatsoever, that in itself is the end that you think is intrinsically valuable. Aimlessness is your ultimate end in life. I asked my students what they thought their end in life was, and most of them say something like, oh, to make people happy, or to have a fun life. That was kind of the two things I saw. Some people were more sophisticated and said, oh, I want to, make the world a better place. And other people were more selfish and were like, I just want to live a happy life and have lots of pleasure, or something like that. Something very hedonistic and very superficial. But it was interesting to see that difference in maturity between different students. So we have this final end, and then we also have intent. Knowing that there is an end that we all have as this end of this chain, there is also then we employ some intention. We have intention here, or will. This is where the will comes in, you could also say, where we're willing this end to occur. And that's kind of the arrow goes the opposite direction. We work backwards. So we employ the means to achieve these ends, and then through intent, we were working backwards. So a lot going on here on this whiteboard, but hopefully you guys can understand what I'm talking about. Now, just as like there is, for example, if I drew this shape here, I think everyone would recognize that I'm trying to draw a circle. I'm attempting to draw a circle. I'm aiming at drawing a circle, but you'd also be able to very clearly see that it's not a perfect circle. And you'd be able to judge that it's not a perfect circle because we have a standard for what is a perfect circle in our geometric concepts. And just like there is a standard for objectively saying that that's not a perfect circle that I'm aiming towards, we can have an objective standard for which we're saying what is the right end? What is the end for which humans are created for, that we are made for, that we should be aiming towards, that we should be striving towards? This is just a consequence of teleology, for one, that we are made with intention and purpose, and two, just because there is a moral realism, that there is objective morality. And so through natural law and through objective morality, we know there must be some end for which we ought to strive for. There's some end for which we were made to pursue. This is one of the what you call final causation. That's Aristotle's four causes. One of them was final causation. Everything has its final end. So what is the final end then? There must be some objective final end for which humans are created. And various philosophers have suggested, like, oh, happiness, or eudaimonia, or your own goodness or excellence, like Nietzsche, or the summum bonum, like Kant, or something like that. However, a certain individual named Plato, and I'll explain why Plato's interpretation is really interesting in a second. Plato said that the end for which we're created is to understand abstract objects, universals, like the perfect form of a circle or the perfect form of a square, because those are things that only us humans are able to comprehend. When we look into the world, we see particulars. We see a particular dog. We don't see, and what's so incredible is the fact that humans are able to recognize something in its perfection, its perfect form, according to Plato. And the fact that we might not see every single kind of pencil, but if I showed you, I was hoping I had a pencil, but if I showed you like a marker or something like that, even if you'd never seen this marker before, you could recognize that this is a marker. It has the universal form of like a marker. Or if I showed you a dog, and you maybe never even knew every species of dog, and this is a new one, you'd still be able to recognize that it is a dog based on certain essential attributes. And so that is what makes humans, that's a mark of humans that's very unique to us. And it's prescribed or predicated to the immaterial part of our soul, according to Plato, called the logos. I should be on cozy, someone says. Great question. I'll probably address that in the end. The logos, or the logical part of our mind. There's also the emotional part of our soul, as well as the appetitive part, or the carnal part of our soul. But the logical part of our soul, what makes that part unique is the fact that we can comprehend abstract objects like universals, like perfect circles and the perfection, like beauty, things like that. These are things that our soul is trying to grasp at. But we'll never be able to experience them in their sublime nakedness. We can only recognize these universals in objects that they instantiate. For example, when we see like a stop sign, we see an octagon. But it's not a perfect octagon, we all know that. Or if I see, like I said, when I drew this circle here, this is not a perfect circle. We can see an instantiation of something, but we don't see its perfectness. We aren't able to experience that yet. We see, humans, but we don't see the perfect human. Well, we kind of do in anime characters. That's something I've always said, is that the anime character is the perfect human, and we're just their instantiation. But in any case, Plato says that the purpose in life, then, is that we're able to experience the end for which we're created is going to be experience the abstract object. And he says this happens when we die. And particularly, he's writing in Phaedo, voiced through Socrates. Socrates is about to be executed for corrupting the youth, and Socrates is asked in Phaedo if he's sad that he's about to get executed, and Socrates says, "No, I'm not sad, because I know my soul will be freed from this material body, this body which only sees particulars, and my soul, this logical part of my soul, the material part of my soul, will be able to experience the Platonic world of forms and their sublimity and their nakedness, and this is for the end for which I was created. And then afterwards I'll be reincarnated and the process will continue over again," or something like that. He believed in reincarnation, which is obviously not something I would subscribe to. Okay, so that was what Plato said. Now Augustine comes along, and Augustine says, yeah, it's just exactly, it's the cave, the allegory of the cave. We only see shadows of reality. That was Plato's allegory. And so you have to come, when we die, we come out of the cave and we see reality as it actually is. But right now we're just in a cave and we see these shadows of reality. And so we want to see justice, truth, beauty in their perfect form, in their perfection. All right. St. Augustine comes along, and he says that there's some issues with Plato's idea, particularly when it comes to this idea of this world of forms. It doesn't really make sense, he says. He points out some problems with it. He also says that Aristotle's idea, Aristotle said that, oh, no, the forms, there's this beautiful picture of Aristotle pointing to the ground and then Plato pointing up, because Aristotle said, no, the forms, they exist in objects, and then they exist in our minds. They don't exist in some magical world of the forms. It's like some third dimension. That doesn't exist. Everything is on reality, is concrete, it's corporal. And Augustine also shows the problem with that idea. And so he reconciles these by saying that there is, in fact, these perfect forms that exist, these universals that exist in the mind of God, and they also exist in objects that are instantiated because they exist in the mind of God. And then we are able to recognize them because we're made in God's image. Because we have the spark of God inside ourselves, that is in our souls, we're able to recognize God's handiwork in the world around us. So that's how Augustine was able to kind of fix this dilemma. Augustine, rather. I keep saying Augustine because it's the Augustinians, but it's St. Augustine. So St. Augustine kind of reconciles this by saying that these abstract objects exist in the mind of God. Alright, now finally comes St. Thomas Aquinas. And St. Thomas Aquinas is writing here, and I have a book called Aquinas on the Four Last Things. Great book, highly recommend it. And in it, he's asking the question, will the glorified intellect be able to see God in his essence? After we die, at our particular judgment, we are going to be judged based on how we lived our lives, how we loved God, the sins we committed, the virtues that we have demonstrated, and then we are either released into purgatory, we receive the beatific vision immediately, or we're sent to hell. And so for those souls who are about to receive the beatific vision, Thomas Aquinas asks, when it comes to the four last things, will they be able to see God? Will they be able to experience God? And his answer is a resounding yes. They have to be able to experience God because that is the end for which they were created. And this is what he says here. Quote, even as we hold by faith that at the last... Excuse me. Hey, it's good to see you, Zizans. Good to see you. Alright, excuse me. So Thomas Aquinas says, quote, even as we hold by faith that the last end of man's life is to see God, so the philosophers maintain that man's ultimate happiness is to understand immaterial substances according to their being. In other words, he's saying that just as the philosophers like Plato said that our ultimate end is to see immaterial substances, he says that because now Augustine has said that these immaterial substances exist in the mind of God, therefore our ultimate end is really to see God. Our ultimate end is really to see God, to experience God, and then to share in a life with God. That is our ultimate end as human beings for which we were created. and for which we have to aim at. Now, how can we aim at sharing in a life with God? How can we aim to see God? In other words, how can we aim to get into heaven? And the answer is we have to be perfect. That is what Christ says, that we have to be perfect like he is perfect and like God the Father is perfect. It's obviously not possible on our own merits, and so that is why we have the merits of Jesus Christ. And we have to love God, we have to know God, we have to serve God. That's what the Catechism says. So that ultimately now we can share in a life with God. That is our purpose in life. And then it becomes incumbent on us to answer, though, how can we love God if we don't know God? We can't love someone we don't know, right? And how can we know God if we're not God? I mean, we're contingent beings. We are fallen contingent beings at that. How can we know the absolute, the person who holds all of reality and existence? And if it was possible for God to go out of existence, all of reality would go out of existence. That is who God is. Everything else is basically like illusion. It's all contingency propped up by God. Everything as being is propped up by God, ourselves included. And so how can we know God? And the answer is that there's only one person who knows God, and that is Jesus Christ. There's only one person who knows God, and that is Jesus Christ, who is God incarnate, the second person of the Trinity incarnate, that is. And it is only through reception of Jesus Christ in Holy Communion that the transmutation of our soul is possible. We're able to take on us, since Christ, he took his divinity, combined it with his humanity, and then under the veil of bread, we're able to receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity, the divine part of Jesus, now contained in this, like you could say, this spatio-temporal presence in the Holy Communion, is imparted to us. And so we receive the divinity of Jesus Christ, which compels us to be holy, compels us to have what's called sanctifying grace in certain Catholic terms. But as the early church father says, we are basically becoming like God. We're asymptotically approaching divinity. We'll never become God because we are, like I said, we are humans. We still have faults. We're still contingent beings. And obviously, in this life, we'll probably not reach theosis. That is why there's a place called purgatory. That's why it makes sense that there's some place of purgation where certain instincts that are contrary to what is good or certain carnal impulses can be completely and fully eradicated. But if you imagine there's like some asymptote here in math, and we're asymptotically approaching, we're converging on divinity. That's what I'm talking about. Through theosis. That's what theosis is. Only possible through reception of Holy Communion. Well, it starts with baptism, in which we receive complete regeneration, and then confirmation, which prepares our soul, and then finally, through Holy Communion, we are able to receive Christ's divinity, and our leadened hearts are able to turn like gold. There's an alchemy of the soul. And that is the end, and I talk about this all the time. I'm sure people who watch the show for a while already know this stuff. But that is the end for which we are created, and that is what we always have to keep in mind. And so as we work backwards, like I showed you guys before, this working backwards, so that now we can work forwards in terms of what means. We apply means to these very intermediate ends so we can reach this final end. If our final end is to share in the life of God. And then we have to think about how we're working backwards with our intentions in order so that we can achieve that end. That is something to bear in mind each and every day, waking up thinking, how can we serve God better? How can we know God better? How can we love God better? So that ultimately one day we can share in a life with God. And the most annoying complaints I hear from retards who are on Reddit is, oh, heaven's gonna be a boring place because you're just gonna be playing a harp, and hell is gonna be fun. That's where all the cool people are. I think Nietzsche had some quote all the most interesting people are in hell or something like that, or maybe I think that was a Nietzsche quote. And that is it's just such a misunderstanding. Because if you think about when you do something that is fulfilling, when you fulfilled something's natural function, like for example, if you accomplish a beautiful symphony, or I imagine most of you guys are not making symphonies. What's something you guys do? I don't know. If you did a group project and you're really proud of your work, there's a sense of contentment and fulfillment in that because you're proud of yourself. You're able to. It's a process of self-realization, and in the same way as, and if you think of an apple tree, what is the end of an apple tree? Able to grow apples. And so a flourishing apple tree is one that grows apples. And so a flourishing human is going to be one that achieves its final end. And that's going to be the most fulfilling, satisfying thing that is possible. And that final end is to see God, to see the divine essence. And once we arrive into heaven and receive the beatific vision, because Christ has transformed our souls, now we receive theosis, we can see God. We have now a glorified intellect. And so now we can see the Trinity, how it works. Right now, we don't really understand it fully. We can't penetrate very deeply into that mystery. We can kind of have an idea of the concepts and kind of a glimpse under a darkened understanding. If you watch my video on the Trinity, I tried to explain it in the best terms I possibly can. But in heaven, we'll be able to see it in its sublimity and its sublime nakedness because of theosis. And so we'll see how the Father is a principal head, and how he's begotten the Son timelessly, and how this Holy Spirit spirates or flows from both the Father and the Son in this perfect harmony and union together forever and ever. And that to us will be the greatest joy, the greatest ecstasy, the greatest fulfillment ever imaginable, and there will be nothing comparable to it, nothing comparable to it. And so that is why heaven is absolutely worth it, absolutely. Yeah, all the interesting people like Luther. Yeah, I saw some people yesterday saying it was Reformation Day or something. I thought it was interesting that the Protestants are celebrating the destruction of the West while the Catholics celebrated Feast of Christ the King. Christ is a king. He's a monarch. Protestantism, it began this process of liberalism and decentralization. Each individual can read the Bible for himself. They cut out, the authority of the Catholic Church, who is Christ's bride, the intermediary on earth for man, and who it really is. It was the one who vests all kings. It's this eradication of the hierarchy is something that the Protestants were celebrating, while the Catholics were celebrating the cosmic hierarchy. Anyway, so that's basically the end for which we were created, like I said, and we will one day receive the beatific vision if we have the final perseverance, carrying out our tasks dutifully and faithfully, receiving Holy Communion we can, going to confession, being baptized, etc. So, thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it. That's basically all I wanted to say.